According to Gallup, 45% of Americans actively seek out organic foods when shopping. Suppose a random sample of 500 Americans is selected, and the proportion who actively seek out organic foods is recorded. What value should we expect for the sample proportion? We expect the sample proportion to be about the same as the population proportion. Because the sample proportion is an unbiased estimator of this population proportion. So we would expect the sample proportion to be pretty close to 45%. Show that this sample is large enough to apply the central limit theorem. So we have to show that n times p and n times 1 minus p are both greater than or equal to 10. So in this problem, n is equal to 500 and p is equal to 0.45. So we have to show that we looked and made sure that 500 times 0.45 and 500 times 1 minus 0.545, or in other words 0.55, that these are both greater than or equal to 10. And so since these are greater than or equal to 10, the central limit theorem can be applied. What is the standard error of this sampling distribution? So we're going to use the formula, the square root of p times 1 minus p over n. So that would be the square root of 0.45 times 0.55 divided by 500. And if you put that into a calculator, you're going to come out with 0.022. Use your answers to part B and C to complete this sentence. In a random sample of 500 Americans, it would be surprising if less than blank percent actively seek out organic foods when shopping. So it's important to notice that this problem asks us to complete a sentence about a percentage. So let's go ahead and draw our picture. From the central limit theorem, we know the sample proportions will vary, but they're going to have this shape. They're going to be centered at the population proportion, and their spread is going to be 0.022, or 2.2%. Something is surprising in a normal distribution if it's more than 2 hops, or 2 standard errors in this case, from the center. And so we're asked to find this number here. That's 0.45 minus 2 standard errors. And if we go ahead and compute that, 0.45 minus 2 standard errors comes out to be about 0.41. So we would be surprised if less than 41% actively sought out organic food when shopping. Complete this sentence in part D again, but this time with a number, not a percentage. In a random sample of 500 Americans, it would be surprising if less than blank people. So now we're looking at a number, not a percentage. Well, we know that the percentage that would be surprising is 41%. So we need to find what 41% of 500 is. So we would take 0.41 and multiply it by 500. And if we do that, we get an answer of 205. So we would be surprised if fewer than 205 people actively sought out organic foods when shopping. Use your sampling distribution to find the probability that more than 50% of the sample actively seeks out organic foods while shopping. So again, I always recommend drawing a picture. So our sampling distribution looks like this. The center would be at 0.45, and the spread, which is called the standard error, would be equal to 0.022. And we'd like to find the probability that the sample proportion is greater than 50%. In other words, we need to find this area. So whenever you want to find the area under a normal curve, you're going to go to StatCrunch and you're going to use your normal calculator. And when you go to your normal calculator, it's going to ask you for the mean. So the mean is 0.45. It's going to ask you for the standard deviation. The standard deviation is 0.022. And you want to find the probability that x is greater than or equal to 0.50. And then when you enter that into StatCrunch, your answer is going to come in this box. So let me go ahead and find that probability for you. If you were to put that into StatCrunch, let's see. Let's put in our mean, and we'll put in our spread. That probability comes out to be about 0.012, or about 1.2%. So it's highly unlikely that your sample will have more than 50% who shop organically. Okay, let's try the next problem. Gallup took a random sample of 1,022 American adults in 2017 and asked them if they trusted the executive branch of government. Of the people sampled, 460 said yes. So our sample proportion is 460 people out of the 1,022 that were sampled. So if we change that into a decimal, we can see that 45% of the sample said they trusted the executive branch of government. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to use that sample proportion to create a confidence interval for the population proportion, the proportion we would get were we to ask all Americans if they trusted the executive branch of government. So to do that, we're going to go to StatCrunch. You go to your screen where you make the proportions, okay? So again, it's stats, proportion stats. In this problem, we have one sample. We only did one group, and we have a summary. Okay, and that will lead you to a screen where you put in X. So X is 460 people out of N, which is your sample size, 1,022. Make sure you click the button that says confidence interval, and make sure that the level of confidence is 95%. So let me go ahead and make a confidence interval for us, and you can check that your StatCrunch output is correct. Okay, so just one moment while I use some technology to do that for us. So if you put that into StatCrunch, you'll come up with a lower limit and an upper limit, and that's what gives you your confidence interval. So the lower limit is about 0.42, and the upper limit is about 0.48. So the way you write a confidence interval is using parentheses. And so we would write parentheses 0.42, comma, 0.48. So what that means is we're 95% confident that were we to ask every American, do you trust the executive branch of government? The percentage would be somewhere between 42 and 48%. What is the margin of error for your confidence interval? So remember, the way a confidence interval is constructed is you take your sample proportion, which we figured out was 45%, and it's in the middle of your confidence interval, which goes from 48% to 42%. And the margin of error is the distance between the center and one of the sides of your confidence interval. So all you have to do is subtract to find the margin of error. So to find the margin of error, all we have to do is take 0.48 and subtract 0.45. And so this confidence interval has a margin of error of 0.03, or you can write that as 3%. Notice that you would have gotten the same answer if you subtracted these two numbers, because the sample proportion is right in the middle of the interval. If an article used a headline saying more than half of Americans actively seek out organic foods when shopping, would you believe this based on your confidence interval? So accidentally, this is about the first problem, organic foods. So it really should belong up to the first one. And in the first one, we didn't make a confidence interval. So this one really should say, and I'll fix this in the assignment, this really should say more than half of Americans trust the executive branch of government. So I'll go ahead and make sure I change that in Canvas. But let's take a look. If this is our confidence interval for the proportion that trusts the executive branch, is that more than half? No, because half would be 50%, and this is definitely not more than 50%. So the answer would be no. Why? Because the interval is below 50%.